What happens when a lady tries to pay for her essential medicines with coins and is ridiculed and humiliated by an impatient pharmacy clerk? She holds back her tears while the customers watch in silence, but no one realizes that the man behind her wearing an elegant yellow jacket over a black dress shirt is none other than Jackie Chan. The moment he intervenes, the whole pharmacy goes into shock. Before continuing with the story, tell us where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we'll have another incredible narrative waiting for you. Dorothy woke up to the soft singing of birds outside the window. The morning sun was slowly streaming in through the glass, illuminating the small apartment where she had lived alone since her husband, Arthur, had died. At 76, Dorothy still kept the habit of getting up early. She liked the quiet mornings, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the gentle rocking of the chair in the living room. Her home was simple but cozy. The walls were decorated with old photos, reminders of a life well lived, now marked by loneliness. Her 10-year-old grandson, Lucas, was her greatest joy. He lived a few blocks away with his parents, but whenever he could, he would spend the afternoons with her, playing cards or listening to her stories. That morning, however, Dorothy didn't have time to lose herself in memories. She needed to go to the pharmacy. A few days earlier, during a routine appointment, the doctor had warned her about her high blood pressure. "Dorothy, you need to take this medicine every day. It's essential for your health." She nodded, holding the prescription tightly. But there was a problem. Money was tight. Her pension barely covered her rent and bills. She did her best to save money, but prices seemed to rise every month. That morning, Dorothy opened her old ceramic piggy bank. She spread the coins out on the table and began to count them carefully. 50 cents, $1, $2. Her heart squeezed as she realized that she had no bills, just a handful of coins that she had collected over the months. It'll do. It has to. She took out a small cloth bag, put the coins inside, and pressed it against her chest before leaving. Lucas ran to the door. "Grandma, where are you going?" Dorothy smiled and ran her fingers through her grandson's hair. "I'm going to the pharmacy, darling. I need to buy some medicine." Lucas grimaced. "Are you going alone?" Dorothy nodded. "Don't worry, darling. I know the way by heart." But Lucas didn't seem convinced. He hugged her tightly, pressing his face against her shoulder. "Be careful, Grandma." Dorothy smiled, feeling the warmth of Lucas's small body against hers. Always. And then, with her handbag pressed against her chest, she walked out the door, unaware of what was about to happen. The pharmacy was on the corner of a busy street, with a big red sign that read, "Discounts not to be missed." Dorothy walked in slowly, the strong smell of medicine mixed with the scent of alcohol gel. There was a queue at the checkout, and she positioned herself at the end, holding her bag tightly. In front of her, young people grabbed energy drinks, mothers bought diapers, and elderly people like her waited patiently for their prescriptions. Time passed slowly, but Dorothy didn't mind. She knew how to wait. What she didn't know was that that day would test her dignity like never before, and that a stranger in the queue behind her would change everything. Dorothy waited patiently, clutching her bag to her chest. The pharmacy was quite full that morning. Young people were picking up vitamins, mothers were medicating their children, and other older customers, like her, were quietly waiting for their prescriptions. There was no rush. Dorothy had always known how to wait, but someone there had no patience at all. Ethan, the cashier. Dorothy gave him a friendly smile as he approached. "Good morning, son." Ethan didn't reply. He just held out his hand. "The prescription, please." Dorothy carefully opened her bag, took out the paper, and handed it over. Ethan took a quick look at the document, typed something into the system, and muttered, without looking at her, "It will cost $23. Dorothy nodded and began to open her bag. It was then that Ethan realized what she was about to do and let out an audible sigh, making sure that everyone around heard. "Please don't tell me you're going to pay with coins." Dorothy, oblivious to his tone, smiled softly. "Yes, dear. It's all I have." She began to count the coins carefully, arranging them by value on the counter. But before she could finish, Ethan let out a sarcastic laugh and shook his head. "Ah, ma'am. Have you ever heard of credit cards?" The words resounded through the store. The disdain in Ethan's voice was impossible to ignore. Dorothy felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She tried to ignore him and continued counting the coins. But Ethan hadn't finished. He crossed his arms and laughed provocatively. "Tell me, ma'am, what happened? Have you just stepped out of a time machine?" Dorothy blinked in surprise. Ethan continued. "Who's still paying with money in 2025, for God's sake? It's the 21st century, and there are still people who don't know how to use a credit card." The humiliation cut through. Dorothy lowered her eyes to the coins, feeling the weight of shame pressing down on her chest. The people around her were paying attention, and she felt the first lump in her throat. Ethan wouldn't stop. He was having fun. He looked at the other customers in the queue and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Seriously, can someone explain to Grandma how credit cards work? Maybe she still thinks people use checks." Some laughed discreetly. Dorothy felt her face heat up. She wanted to say something. She wanted to explain that her pension barely covered her expenses. She wanted to tell them that she had collected those coins one by one, that every penny represented a great effort. But nothing came out, because deep down she knew that no one wanted to hear her explanations. A heavy silence filled the pharmacy. The reactions around her didn't take long to appear. Some looked away, uncomfortable, reluctant to intervene. Others smiled discreetly, finding the scene funny. A well-dressed woman with a designer handbag in her hands whispered to her husband, "This can't be real. Who still pays like that?" Another customer shook his head impatiently. Dorothy felt her heart racing. The fear of humiliation squeezed her chest. She tried to continue counting the coins, but her hands were so shaky that some fell to the floor. The sound of the coins falling seemed louder than it really was, and that was enough to make Ethan let out a laugh. "Seriously, this is turning into a circus." Dorothy felt tears burn her eyes. She couldn't cry there, but her heart was breaking. Then a deep, firm voice echoed through the pharmacy. "Enough." The whole pharmacy fell silent. The laughter stopped. All eyes turned to the man who had just spoken. A man of medium height, wearing a striking yellow jacket that contrasted with his impeccably buttoned black dress shirt, stepped forward. His posture was calm but imposing, and his voice sounded not like a request, but a warning. Ethan frowned, surprised by the interruption. He let out a dry laugh, crossing his arms. "Who are you to say that?" The man didn't reply immediately. Instead, he slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing firm, determined eyes. Someone in the queue whispered, "I know that guy." Dorothy looked at the stranger next to her, confused. She didn't know who he was, but for some reason, her heart felt lighter. Finally, someone was standing up for her. Then a calm, deep voice resounded through the pharmacy again, silencing everyone. "Enough." Silence hung in the air. All eyes were fixed on the man in the yellow jacket. His voice cut through the humiliation like a blade. Dorothy blinked in surprise. Ethan frowned, trying to disguise his discomfort, but he didn't like being challenged. He let out a dry laugh, crossing his arms. "Oh, and who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" The man didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked calmly at Ethan, with an expression that exuded authority. Someone in the queue whispered quietly, "This guy looks familiar." Dorothy looked at him again, still not understanding what was going on. But for the first time that day, she didn't feel alone. Ethan looked around, noticing that the attention was no longer on him, and this irritated him deeply. He turned to Dorothy, determined to regain control of the situation. "Ma'am, honestly, I don't have all day to count coins." Dorothy felt the words go through her chest like a knife. But he wasn't finished yet. "If you really don't have any money, what are you doing here? Maybe you should ask the government for help, not me." The humiliation increased. Dorothy couldn't speak. Her eyes were full of tears, and her chest was tight. She tried to hold in her emotions, but Ethan wasn't finished. He picked up the coins she had placed on the counter, holding them as if they were dirt. "Or maybe you should try another pharmacy, one that still accepts medieval payments." A few low chuckles echoed among the customers. Dorothy felt shame consume her soul. She wanted to disappear, but before she could do anything, the man next to her finally acted. He stepped forward, shortening the distance between him and the counter. The energy in the pharmacy changed instantly. His tone was calm, but his words carried undeniable weight. "Do you think talking to a lady like that makes you seem important?" Ethan blinked, surprised. The man kept his gaze fixed on him, unperturbed, and the whole pharmacy seemed to hold its breath. "Because to me, You're just a spoiled brat who's never learned respect." Ethan's face turned red. He tried to laugh again, but now his eyes no longer showed arrogance, only discomfort. "Look, I'm just doing my job. You're holding up the line." The man smiled softly. "Since when does your job include humiliating customers?" Ethan swallowed. He realized that no one was laughing anymore. People were no longer standing next to him. Dorothy looked at the man, overcome with emotion. For so long, she had had to learn to put up with this kind of treatment, but now someone was standing up for her, and she had no idea who it was. The man turned to Dorothy with a gentle smile. Much further. Dorothy hesitated, embarrassed. She looked at the coins scattered on the counter, almost $5. The man reached into his pocket and, without hesitation, placed a $100 bill on the counter. Ethan tensed, and a murmur spread through the pharmacy. "That should be enough, right?" said the man, without stopping to look at Dorothy. She sighed softly, shocked. "I can't accept that." The man held her hands gently. "You've already done so much for others. Now, it's our turn." Dorothy couldn't hold back her tears. The pharmacy fell completely silent. Everyone was now looking at Ethan. He swallowed, realizing that he was completely cornered. Then a voice broke the silence. "Wait a minute. I know that guy." Everyone turned to the customer, who shouted, "It's Jackie Chan!" A wave of surprise went through the store. A customer dropped his shopping bag. A woman ran to her cell phone and started recording. The color disappeared from Ethan's face. Dorothy blinked, confused. "Jackie Chan," said the man with a smile. Dorothy could hardly believe it. She had heard that name before, but now, looking at the man who had just defended her, she didn't know what to say. "And Ethan?" Ethan felt his world come crashing down. The pharmacy was now completely against him, and for the first time, he realized that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. "Jackie Chan?" stammered Ethan, his eyes wide. Suddenly, the whole game changed. The pharmacy went into shock. The name Jackie Chan hung in the air. A woman dropped her cell phone on the counter, her hands shaking as she tried to record. A young man looked at his friend, his mouth hanging open. "Can't be. Is it really him?" Ethan felt sweat trickle down the back of his neck. He didn't know what to say. After all, he had just humiliated a lady in front of Jackie Chan. But instead of apologizing, he tried to insist. "Oh, come on." He forced a laugh, trying to disguise his nervousness. "This has to be a joke." Jackie kept his gaze fixed on Ethan. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, because that look wasn't that of a Hollywood actor. It was the look of a man who didn't tolerate injustice. Dorothy was still trying to process what was happening. She looked at Jackie, then at Ethan, and then at the customers, who were now looking at her with pure disdain. She had never seen a place so silent. Jackie crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Is this how you treat your customers?" Her voice was low, but laden with weight. Ethan let out a nervous laugh. "Look, buddy, I was just joking. It was nothing serious." Jackie raised an eyebrow. "Joking?" She looked around, at Dorothy, who was still clutching her coins with trembling hands, and at the customers, who were now whispering among themselves, indignant. Did anyone here find that funny? The silence was absolute. Ethan tried to keep smiling, but his throat was dry. He knew he had lost control of the situation. Jackie took another step forward, resting her hands on the counter. "Let me ask you something, kid." The air in the pharmacy seemed heavier. Ethan swallowed. Jackie continued. "If this lady was your grandmother, would you talk to her like that?" Ethan shivered slightly. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Because deep down, he knew the answer. No. He would never talk to his own grandmother like that. He looked away and stared at the floor. I was just following store policy." Jackie let out an incredulous laugh. "Oh, right. The policy that says you have to humiliate elderly customers in front of everyone." Ethan clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, but how could he? Everyone had seen. Everyone had heard. And now everyone knew, because he knew the cameras were recording it. Jackie picked up the change from the counter and handed it to Dorothy. She held the notes in her trembling hands. Jackie smiled at her. "It's all sorted, darling. You can go home without any worries." Dorothy couldn't hold back her tears any longer. They were no longer tears of shame, but of gratitude. She looked at Jackie and whispered, "Thank you so much. Thank you so much." Jackie held her hands gently. "You're welcome. Respect should come naturally." Dorothy nodded, overcome with emotion. But before she left, she looked at Ethan and said something no one expected. "Everyone has a bad day, son, but there's still time to make it better." Ethan's eyes opened like plates. He expected anger, shouting, but what he got was understanding. And it hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. When Dorothy left, Jackie Chan turned to Ethan. He took out his wallet and put more money on the counter. "This is for the medicine." Then he looked at the pharmacy manager, who was standing there watching everything, paralyzed. "And this guy here," he pointed at Ethan, "is he the kind of employee who represents your business?" The manager swallowed. Ethan felt his stomach turn, because now it wasn't just a customer who was judging him. The whole world was watching. It was then that a customer picked up his cell phone and spoke out loud. "This is already going viral. More than 50,000 views in less than 10 minutes. Ethan felt his heart stop. Jackie Chan just smiled slightly. "I think you're going to need a new job." The pharmacy erupted in murmurs. The manager gestured for Ethan to go to the back of the store, and everyone knew what was coming. Ethan's arrogance had come to an end. And then Ethan heard the words he never imagined he would hear. "We need to talk in the boardroom now." Ethan swallowed. The words he'd never expected to hear kept resounding in his mind. "We need to talk in the meeting room now." The pharmacy manager, a man with gray hair and a stern look, gestured for Ethan to follow him. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. He looked around for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. The customers were still watching him, many with their cell phones in hand, recording every step he took. Jackie Chan remained silent, watching with a calm but firm expression. Dorothy, still, outside, wiped away her tears, while an employee gently helped her. And Ethan walked towards what seemed to be his final sentence. When he entered the meeting room, the air seemed even heavier. The manager closed the door behind him and let out a long sigh. "What the hell were you thinking?" Ethan tried to open his mouth to defend himself, but there was no defense. The manager picked up his cell phone, turned the screen to Ethan, and pressed the play button. Ethan felt his stomach turn. The video of Dorothy's humiliation already had hundreds of thousands of views. Outraged comments filled the screen. "This employee should be fired immediately. Disgusting. I won't go back to that pharmacy while he's there. Someone needs to give Jackie Chan an award, please." And then came the worst. The manager's phone rang urgently. He put it on speaker mode. "This is the owner of the company. This employee needs to be fired by the end of the day. He's ruining our image." The manager nodded. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Ethan," said the manager with a firm tone, "you're fired." The words hit him like a direct punch. And for the first time, Ethan knew what it was like to be publicly humiliated. The silence outside the room was deafening. Ethan opened the door slowly, his face completely pale. He saw the customers still waiting, many staring at him, some whispering, others just recording his departure. His uniform, which had once given him power over the customers, now looked like a cruel joke. He picked up his things in silence. The manager said nothing more. The employees avoided eye contact. And then, the worst, before he left, he saw that Dorothy was still outside with the bag of medicines in her hand. Her eyes were still swollen from crying, but now there was something else in them, compassion. Ethan couldn't stand it. He looked away and left the pharmacy as quickly as he could. He didn't want to hear anymore, but before he could disappear down the sidewalk, a voice called out to him. And it wasn't just any voice. It was the voice of Jackie Chan. "Hey, kid." Ethan went still. His heart raced. He turned slowly and saw Jackie Chan approaching him. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Jackie stopped right in front of him. He didn't look angry, but his gaze remained steely. "What have you learned from all this?" Ethan didn't know what to say. He looked around, embarrassed. The cameras were still rolling. He wiped his hands on his face, took a deep breath, and for the first time, lowered his head. "I was an idiot." Jackie nodded slightly. "Yes, you were." Ethan felt the weight of those words. But then, Jackie put her hand on his shoulder and said something no one expected. "But everyone has the chance to change." Ethan looked up, confused. He expected anger, contempt, but all he got was an opportunity to do things the right way. Over the next few days, Ethan discovered a new reality. At the community shelter, he worked hard, organizing donations, serving meals, and talking to people who had much less than he did, but who still managed to smile. Little by little, Ethan began to realize that the respect he never had for others wasn't about money or status, but about empathy. It was about seeing the world through the eyes of others. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt he was doing something really important. One afternoon, while organizing boxes of clothes at the shelter, he heard someone call him by name. Ethan. He turned around, surprised. There, in the doorway, was Dorothy. She was holding a small shopping bag and a warm smile. Ethan stood still, not knowing what to say. Dorothy approached and held out the bag. "I brought you some bread and cakes. They said you needed more food for breakfast." Ethan took the bag, still speechless. "Dorothy, what are you doing here?" She smiled gently. "I've been a volunteer here for years. I was surprised when they said a young man was helping, but now I understand." She looked deeply into his eyes. Ethan looked away, still ashamed of what he had done. But Dorothy put a gentle hand on his arm. "You chose to change, and that's what really matters." Ethan felt a lump in his throat because for the first time, he realized that forgiveness is not something you ask for, but something you earn. And there, in front of Dorothy, he realized that perhaps he was finally on the right path. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Dorothy arrived home earlier than usual. Jackie Chan had promised to visit, and she still didn't know what to expect. It wasn't long before a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of her house. Dorothy opened the door and saw Jackie getting out of the car with a large envelope in his hands. Lucas, who had been playing outside, ran over excitedly when he saw him. "Mom, it's the guy from Avengers." Jackie laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. Dorothy, still confused, looked at him. "What are you doing here, darling?" Jackie smiled and handed over the envelope. "Dorothy, you've spent your whole life helping others. You raised your family, looked after your grandson, and even when you were mistreated, you chose kindness. The world needs more people like you." Dorothy held the envelope in her trembling hands. When she opened it, her eyes filled with tears. Inside was an official document. Jackie explained, "This is a scholarship fund for Lucas. You'll never have to worry about school or university again. Everything is covered, and you'll never have to worry about Medicat Ion or expenses again. I wanted to do this because people like you deserve all the recognition in the world." Dorothy put her hand over her mouth, overcome with emotion. She looked at Lucas, who still didn't quite understand what was happening, but smiled happily, feeling the joy in the air. Then she turned to Jackie and, without saying a word, hugged him tightly. Jackie returned the hug, feeling the warmth of genuine gratitude. And, for a moment, the world seemed a better place. That evening, as Jackie was getting ready to leave, Dorothy looked at Lucas and smiled. "Darling, do you remember the day I went to the pharmacy?" Lucas nodded. "Yes, Grandma. That guy was very cruel to you." Dorothy sighed. "Yes, but it was because of that moment that all this happened. And, more importantly, it gave someone the chance to change." Lucas frowned. "The box?" Dorothy smiled. "Yes, everyone can learn to be better. Sometimes they just need a second chance." Lucas thought for a moment, and then gave a mischievous smile. "Like in the Jackie Chan movies, when the villain starts out bad but then turns good?" Jackie laughed. "I think I like that comparison." Dorothy held Lucas's hand. "What really matters, my love, is that goodness always finds a way to come back to us. Always." And that afternoon, as the sun set, Dorothy realized that her life would never be the same again. Because, after all, true wealth is not in money, but in the kindness we share with the world. This was Dorothy's emotional journey and the transformative impact of Jackie Chan's kindness, not only on her life, but on Ethan's too. But now, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Do you believe that small gestures of empathy and compassion can really change the world? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'd love to know what you think. And if this story has touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone you think needs to hear this message of hope and transformation. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't waste any time. Click on the subscribe button and activate the bell to receive notifications of more stories that show the power of kindness, resilience, and second chances. Do you want to be inspired even more? Then don't go anywhere. Click on one of the videos that appear on the screen to see another moving narration that will touch your heart and remind you of what really matters in life. See you in the next video with more stories that will make you believe in the best of humanity. See you then.